need any assistance, so we have Miss Janice Hilaire, and I think Mr. Fulgen Sempri will be joining us. And we also have Miss Latoya Burnham. So if there are any questions that you guys need assistance with, need cross-skills assistance with answering, you can call on one of them and they're ready to come on and assist.
Okay.
All right. And so cameras off and we are getting ready to go on YouTube.
CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code was developed to help property developers increase the energy efficiency and the upgradability of their building projects. Energy savings help offset the potential higher cost of building your home to code. And enhanced upgradability helps commercial owners increase their competitive advantage, saving money over time. Additionally, lower energy demands during and after the building process can also lead to community and national level benefits like reduced reliance on fossil fuel generated electricity across the construction industry and in homes, lower national fuel import bills, which can free up funding for other critical areas of investment, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So do the maths, play the long game, and help build towards a better future today. For more information on the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, visit energy.crosq.org.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the CREEBC in a Snapshot Town Hall webinar. Let me start off with the salutations. Mr. Derek Omar, CEO CREEBC, representatives of the CARICOM Energy Unit and the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, directors and colleagues within the CREEBC network, head of organizations, heads of private sector agencies and businesses, media personnel present, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nadita Ramachala. I'm the manager of the Standardization Division at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. It is my pleasure to be your moderator for this third and final webinar related to the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code. I thank CREEBC for its leadership in the area of energy efficiency and energy conservation, and hosting a series of webinars aimed at improving our understanding of energy efficiency in buildings and the CREEBC as we strive for a more sustainable future, reduce our carbon footprint and our reliance on costly imports of fossil fuels in the region. Once again, welcome to all the participants, and I look forward to an engaging session today. Before we start today's technical session, please allow me to recap the first two sessions, which have really set the stage for the interactive discussion on the ASHRAE compliance. Day one featured the opening session with Mr. Derek Omar, the CEO of CREEBC, giving an insight into the history and motivation for the development of the CREEBC. We then heard from Mr. Elson Jordan, Finance Manager of CREE, who highlighted the importance of the CREEBC initiative, creating innovative solutions and participating in conversations related to energy efficiency in the region. He highlighted the importance of the 5 Ps that shape the UN Sustainable Development Goals: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. Then, Mr. Fuljan Simpre, Technical Officer for Standards at CREEBC, did an excellent job of moderating the session. It featured Mr. Churchill Norbert, Managing Director, Energy and Energy Consultant Services, who is the chair of the regional project team that was responsible for the development of the CREEBC. Mr. Norbert highlighted the residential impacts, defining a residential building, reviewing the compliance options of the code. He also highlighted the CREEBC's requirements for the building thermal envelope, lighting systems, as well as the mechanical system. He then gave a quite comprehensive review of the implications for the existing building. We moved on to day two, focused on the commercial implications. Mr. Jonathan Platt, the Technical Officer for Engineering and Building Components from the Barbados National Standards Institution, did a fabulous job in moderating the session. After, Mr. Ryan Cobb, the Energy Director of the Ministry of Public Service, Energy and Public Utilities in Belize, drilled down into the commercial requirements of the CREEBC. He gave a very informative overview of the common requirements of the CREEBC for commercial buildings, and highlighted a couple of reasons why the codes were important for commercial buildings, including conservation of energy over the useful lifetime of the building and providing flexibility for innovation. These provisions are crucial to commercial buildings as it impacts the look, feel, and function of the building. Both sessions were highly informative, highlighting that we can play a role in reducing climate change and implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals through building more energy efficient buildings and utilizing more energy efficient lighting and appliances. So welcome again to today's session, and we will start off with an interactive poll so that we can obtain some feedback from all the participants. I will now turn you over to the CREEBC team to initiate the poll. So please complete the poll that is being shared now. So let's see the results. Have you heard about the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code prior to this webinar? And an overwhelming 97%. So we are really here to learn a little more about the CREEBC, given that you all are very familiar with the excellent work that CREEBC is doing. And where have you heard about the CREEBC? The overwhelming response was via the national standards body. And again, CREEBC is a network of all the standards bodies within the region. So we must commend the standards bodies for doing an excellent job in promoting and educating stakeholders on the code. And the final question, does your country have a building code or energy code? We have 64% saying yes, 21% saying no, and 15% saying I don't know. So somewhat expected in terms of responses, or the majority of participants being familiar with building codes or energy codes. So thank you for your responses. And we will now go into some brief housekeeping rules. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions or type any comments that you may have for today's presenters or for the moderator's attention. So we will be monitoring the chat and to look at your questions. We encourage engagement among yourselves utilizing the chat function. And we will have some additional questions throughout the session today. The webinar is being recorded and you need to give your consent to continue, and it is also being streamed live on YouTube. So thank you so much for the housekeeping rules. And on this note, we'd like to commence the technical presentation from our featured presenter, Mr. Stanley Smelly. I will now go through his bio. Stanley is employed at the University of the West Indies, Mona, where he is at the forefront of energy management programs. He's integrally involved in the design, development, implementation, and oversight of the campus's energy conservation and efficiency program, which also includes verification of energy conservation and efficiency measures, energy policy formulation and the development, energy awareness programs, alternative energy projects, and sustainable energy management research. He is currently pursuing a PhD in sustainable development at UWI. During the period September 2018 to October 2019, he was a visiting PhD researcher at the Center for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Surrey, located in the UK, on a Commonwealth scholarship. His PhD research focuses on using data to address some of the technical and policy challenges of integrating distributed energy resources into a power grid, such as Jamaica's. He's also an adjunct lecturer in his area of expertise at UWI and at the University of Technology. He is a graduate of UWI Mona with a BSc in Electronics and Computer in Science, a double major. He has an MPhil degree in physics, which focus on sustainable energy management and energy information system, and was awarded with high commendation in 2014. He's an Association of Energy Engineers Legends in Energy, a certified energy manager and a Commonwealth scholar. He has over 15 years track record of achievements and accomplishments in energy engineering and sustainable energy management in the Caribbean, and has successfully designed and implemented numerous energy conservation and efficiency and renewable energy technology projects. In addition, Stanley provides consultancy services in the areas of his expertise to the private and public sector entities, both in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean region. For example, he has worked with the Jamaican government in the development of its national energy policy, the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, and the continued development of Jamaica's energy efficiency standards for appliances and equipment, CREEBC in the development of a regional energy efficiency building code, and the CARICOM Secretariat in regional energy policy and initiatives. So as you can see, Stanley has a wealth of experience in the area of sustainable energy management, and I will now turn you over to him to go through the ASHRAE compliance requirements, and the ASHRAE requirements being an integral part of the CREEBC as one of the key reference codes. So thank you very much, and Stanley, take it over.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramachala. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning in the third in a series of energy CREEBC in a snapshot, virtual town hall. I was going to say Quebec because that's how we tend to pronounce it, but I'm catching on to an additional pronunciation, CREEBC in a snapshot. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I do hope that I'll be able to impart some of my experience and understanding regarding the ASHRAE compliance path as relates to the CREEBC. So let's get straight into it. Just like to confirm that my screen is in fact being shared and that we're all able to view it.
Yes, you're clear.
Yes. All right, thank you. So energy in a snapshot, virtual town hall, ASHRAE compliance. I am Stanley Smelly, and again, thank you for a wonderful introduction. Much appreciated. So energy conservation and efficiency are integral to CARICOM member states for so many reasons, and many of which have already been expounded upon, explained, and even went over on a number of occasions since the series has started. But just to highlight just one solemn point, most of the islands within the Caribbean, we are, let's say, energy poor. We import the bulk of our energy in terms of fossil fuel, and we convert that into other usable forms at the source level. And from there, we go ahead and we utilize that energy for electricity generation, for transportation, etc. However, this energy that we're utilizing, as we've seen in the world, it's not the best way to go. And increasingly, we're seeing that this fossil-based energy has been contributing significantly to global climate change impacts. And so here in the Caribbean, we have decided to take a multi-pronged approach to addressing these issues. And by addressing, I'm referring to our ability to increase our resilience. That is, we're better able to recover from climate change impacts, and also to mitigate, to prevent the impacts from being as bad as it could have been. One of the methods is with this wonderful energy efficiency building code called the CREEBC. I happen to have a hard copy. Well, it's not showing so well with the virtual background, but this code is available for purchase through the IECC website, and we can also contact the CREEBC to see how best we can get our own copy. But here in the Caribbean, we have developed and promulgated this particular building code, referred to as a regional, the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code. And it is specifically developed by us, members within the Caribbean region, for us, members in the Caribbean region. It's an international code, so there are many aspects of it that are common throughout the world or wherever this code is being utilized, but it has been adapted to suit our needs. This was done in 2018 officially, and it was based on the CARICOM application document. And from there, we now have our own version of an international code suitable for our purpose. So in the CREEBC, there are a number of compliance paths, and we've been talking about those since the beginning of this series. Today, I'll focus only on the ASHRAE 90.1 compliance path. Specifically, I'll focus on the ASHRAE 90.1 2016, because since 2016, there's been a review of that version, and we now have a 2019 version, but our focus will be on the 2016. So the CREEBC identifies ASHRAE 90.16 as an optional compliance path for commercial buildings. And in this case, we're talking about buildings that are not residential. So you can stretch your mind as much as you want. Once it's not residential, then you can actually apply this ASHRAE 90.1 standard. ASHRAE in and of itself it's a society. It refers as an acronym really. It refers to the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning. They have been about for over 126 years, made up of engineers, facilities managers, persons who are actually in the field, working on buildings, working on building systems, engineering these systems, maintaining them. And so that cumulative knowledge and experience, they put that into this wonderful document that we now have access to. So as of 2003, ASHRAE has decided to publish a document in its entirety that deals with issues of building energy efficiency and ways we can assure reliability of the electrical power grid in general. Stuff like being more comfortable within a facility in terms of how the air conditioning may work, being able to operate your systems cost effectively, and ensure that you have the various energy, economic, and environmental benefits that you can actually, benefit from that. So materials within the standard, they're actually subjected to review at 3-year interval. And as a result of that, you can rest assured that as technology progresses and there's consensus on that technology, then those will be reflected in the policies today and in the future. So the purpose of the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 is really to establish the minimum energy efficiency requirements of buildings other than low-rise residential buildings. So you talk about the design, construction, and plan for operation and maintenance of these facilities, and also how you can utilize on-site energy, such as renewable sources. The overall goal of each version of the standard seeks to be better than the one before, and they tend to achieve that in so many ways. The standard in of itself, though, does not attempt to circumvent any health codes or any codes that deals with safety or the environment. So it's very important that we make note of that. The ASHRAE 90.1 scope, it applies to new buildings, renovations, partitions, improvements, not just to the entire building, but to equipment within the building or major systems. And there's a criteria for determining whether those systems, that new building, renovation systems within the building, are compliant with the standards. However, the provisions of ASHRAE 90.1 do not apply to single family houses, multifamily structures, or 3 stories or fewer, that is above grade. So we don't consider about mobile units either. And if it is that the electricity is applied to the facility that we're working on, if the facility doesn't use electricity, nor any fossil fuel source of energy, then the code won't apply either. And of course, there are always exemptions that are actually well detailed in the code itself. These new building codes, they relate to so many other codes that are out there. And the idea is that we are aware of this and not necessarily look at a code as just a single one size fits all. We are expected to be aware that while we're talking about an energy code that is applied to buildings to achieve maximum energy efficiency, to eliminate energy waste, to improve our overall environmental footprint, so to speak. But we also have to be mindful of, it interacts with the building code in general, and the building code speaks about many aspects of the structure. We talk about the fire code, safety, there's plumbing, there's electrical, and there's also mechanical. All these codes are actually provided separately, but this particular energy code links with all of them in so many ways. Now, it is important to utilize this code for so many reasons. I'll just summarize in a nutshell that it ensures the energy, economic, and environmental benefits that we all seek to achieve under our sustainable development goals. We talk about having livable cities, about reducing global climate change impacts. There's so many desires and aims that we have. And one of the surest way we can achieve that is if we make our buildings more efficient. So establishing minimum energy efficient requirements for new constructions, and in overall, the code helps to achieve a more comfortable and cost-effective building operation. This is what the code looks like if you will get a copy of it as standalone. However, in our CREEBC, this code is included in its entirety, except that there's certain section that does not apply to the Caribbean. It indicates within our CREEBC that those sections do not apply. In addition to that, our CREEBC will tailor some of the information to best reflect our reality. And so it's best to get the version of the ASHRAE that is included in our CREEBC and not the ASHRAE 90.1 version that is out there for the general public. Compliance pass for commercial buildings, though, it's not as straightforward as one would think, but it is fairly easy to grasp. And I'll just take the next couple of minutes to walk you through the various compliant path that we'll have under the ASHRAE standard. Beginning, however, you must first ensure that you're dealing with a commercial building. Then you determine the compliance path that you wish to select, whether it be you're focusing exclusively on the prescriptive provisions of the IEC code, that most of that was covered, if not all of that was covered in the past 2 days. And that speaks to both commercial and residential buildings. However, for the ASHRAE compliance path, it takes a path on its own. And when you come further down, you realize that it also has its own prescriptive provisions. It has its energy cost budget provisions that is more based on performance of the building as opposed to a prescription. Prescription means do A, B, C, D, E in the exact order as I tell you, using the exact parameters as I tell you, and you will achieve a building that is compliant. While performance is more like, okay, this is what you want to achieve in terms of overall energy efficiency, overall cost of the overall energy cost that that facility or that system may generate. And then you compare that with some baseline. And once you're able to demonstrate that you're equal or better, then you're good to go. And of course, there's Appendix G, which is fairly new. And that is an improvement over the energy cost budget in that it's a bit simpler to employ. One of the essential things that we need to always consider when dealing with the ASHRAE codes is that we always have to have climate in our minds. Thermal zones, very important. And so ASHRAE actually has a standard, a separate standard that deals with climate zones, and that is standard 169. Now, what we have done in the Caribbean is that we've modified that standard, ASHRAE standard 169, to include a new thermal zone, 0, and we refer to that as tropical. And that speaks to areas that have 6,000 or less cooling degree days at 10 degrees C. Now, we won't go into the details of exactly what that means in the interest of time. Now, I suspect that this slide may not be as clear as I want it to, but hopefully you'll be able to recognize your various countries. Barbados is there. We also have Jamaica, Further down, we have Trinidad and Tobago, and you can see that for all our Caribbean islands, we have assigned climate zones to them. So whenever you're doing your calculations to determine compliance for ASHRAE, it's important that you consider the climatic zone and the various variables that we're working with. Extremely important. And this was actually done for us in the Caribbean, because often the Caribbean was just seen as a single dot and treated as if the entire region was just under one climatic zone. However, during the development of our CREEBC, we're able to develop using our institutional knowledge throughout the region in terms of our climate science and information to assign climatic zone to the different regions. So are we getting real energy savings from ASHRAE 90.1? That's a question to you, and I will come back to it in a while. Let's just think about it. For those who have already been somewhat familiar or very familiar with the ASHRAE 90.1 2016, and based on what I've said so far in terms of what it aims to do, what the intent of it is, do you think we will get, or are we getting real energy savings from the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 standards? Well, looking at this chart, it clearly shows that since the inception of the ASHRAE standards in 1975, where they use a benchmark of 100% in terms of the energy use index, it's been normalized in this case. And over the years, we've seen at every 3-year interval, well, initially it wasn't 3 years, but since 2003, it has been a 3-year revision interval. We've seen how the overall energy efficiency for new constructions, for commercial facilities, we've seen how it has increased tremendously during that period. Now, in spite of these successes, we note that not all areas have actually gone ahead and implemented the ASHRAE standards. And a lot of it has to do with the regulatory framework, legal implications, and also costs. But once the ASHRAE standard comes out, there is actually a procedure in which, by which you have to go through to ensure that the code itself actually achieves a certain level of energy efficiency before ask entities to implement. And that is done by the Department of Energy in the US, and they tend to issue a determination indicating how well the code has performed. And when you compare ASHRAE standards 2013 to the ASHRAE standards 2016, the indications are that the code is expected to save approximately 8.2% in energy costs, and in terms of source energy, about 6.7%. So it does work, and this code actually saves an energy. So the ASHRAE compliant paths. So you notice that we came down and we looked at ASHRAE. But within ASHRAE, where you have the prescriptive and the energy cost budget and the Appendix G, what ASHRAE does is that they look at it from a building systems perspective. If you go ahead and you do an energy audit, you would tend to, after doing all your measurements and you begin to analyze that data, certain trends become apparent. For example, you realize that air conditioning may account for the lion's share of your energy usage, especially here in the Caribbean. We'll be able to determine what percentage of our overall energy usage accounted for by lighting. In some cases, we may have service water heating. We may have other systems such as elevators, large pumps, various other types of systems. And we're able to determine quite clearly how these different building systems come together to contribute to the overall energy usage and overall efficiency of that facility. So ASHRAE Path actually takes that approach where they look at each of these building systems individually. And they say, these are the requirements to ensure that these respective systems are actually compliant. And once you're able to demonstrate that from a systems level, when you put the whole thing together, you will now have an overall facility that is in fact compliant. It also suggests that you can just focus on 1 or 2 or 3 aspects of your building when you're doing ASHRAE. You don't have to consider the entire facility, which is actually a big improvement over some other codes, because it gives you that flexibility, especially if you're a construction manager, and in terms of your resources available, in terms of project costs, and even in terms of access to skill sets and time, you'll be able to still achieve some level of compliance if you take the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 approach. So what we'll do going from here now is that we want to understand what the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 standard covers. So we'll be reviewing the mandatory requirements, and we will now go from there and look at the prescriptive path. Based on time, I won't be able to go through in detail all other paths, but by understanding the mandatory as well as the prescriptive option, that will give you a good idea of what the ASHRAE standards is all about. The prescriptive path is actually most commonly used as well, which is this. So if I select billing envelope, then I know deal with all the mandatory requirements for billing envelope, and then I might choose that I'll be approaching it from a prescriptive perspective. And then that will allow me to achieve code compliance. What I'm saying now is that persons tend to mainly use the prescriptive approach because there are actually software tools available that will assist you in doing that, such as ComCheck, COMCHEK, and it's widely available on the US Department of Energy website. So in terms of the compliant path for billing envelope, we have a situation here where unless every single prescriptive element is met, then a project must comply via the performance path. Of course, there can be trade-offs in terms of if you're not able to meet it fully in one aspect. For example, when we talk about the building envelope, we are considering the entire facility as you see in this graphic, and we may have everything that is pretty much within the walls of the building. If it's a conditioned space, we refer to that as a conditioned space. But that wall that separates the inside of the facility from the outside of the facility, that's the envelope, that forms the envelope. And there are various requirements and specifications that we use to ensure that our building envelope actually meets the ASHRAE standards. We talk about R values, we talk about U values, we talk about how we can reduce solar heat gain. We talk about all these various aspects, but at the end of the day, we want to find methods of reducing the transfer of heat from the outside to the inside. Or if you look at another way, if we're of a conditioned space in terms of it being cool, we don't want warm air from outside to come inside and warm up that cool air that we spend so much money to facilitate. And so the building envelope, these are the mandatory requirements. When we talk about building envelope, we talk about insulation, and there's a whole section in the CREEBC that deals with this. It gives you details about, for example, if you're talking about your roofs, exactly how you can achieve a roof that is compliant based on the type of material you're using. What is it that you should look for in terms of the R values, in terms of if you have fenestration, windows, opaque doors, etc. The standard goes through in details in terms of what are the levels you should be looking at. So of course, energy labeling plays a crucial role because whatever it is that you're purchasing and you plan to install, you want to ensure that there's some label to indicate that it meets whatever standards. Some manufacturers actually stamp on their products that this is ASHRAE compliant with whatever standards, which makes it even easier. And of course, when we talk about insulation, fenestration, and doors, air leakage is also extremely important. So we talk about infiltration and exfiltration, how we can keep that cold air in, that air that we spend so much trying to condition, how we can keep it in, how we can manage relative humidity, stuff like that. The code provides details on that. So I hope you're getting excited about this because it may be possible that you want to be compliant, you want to be able to design a building that's efficient, but you just don't know how. What we're saying is that in this CREEBC, all the information is there in terms of what you can do based on the path that you choose for compliance. And so we just looked at the mandatory requirements. Now we're looking at the prescriptive options for the building envelope. So you have to deal with insulation and all those stuff. But in addition, these are the stuff that you will be able to get detailed information on. So we want to ensure that the requirements are appropriate to the climate zone, as I mentioned earlier. Each envelope component must separately meet designated space conditioning requirements. And if a building contains any semi-heated space, it's not directly heated per se by air conditioning, but it has a wall or a partition that you can have some amount of transfer of heat through maybe radiation, etc. Or maybe some of the conditioned air might spill over and it causes it to become somewhat semi-conditioned. So building envelope shall comply with the requirements for these areas as well. I'm going to now move in the interest of time, because there's a lot of material that I wish to cover, but we will in fact have an opportunity. As I ask these questions, you hope you're making mental notes as well as typing any responses to them in the chat. And as we come closer to the end of this presentation, we will give you a few minutes to ask any questions before we wrap up the presentation, and then we move into a discussion on how we can apply some of what we just spoke about or what we're talking about now to, for example, an industry in the Caribbean. So we're getting there. So here we now have a situation where we're now looking at another building system, HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And some persons may add refrigeration to that. So as discussed in terms of the approach we're taking, there are mandatory requirements. And we will now highlight the mandatory requirements as well as looking at the prescriptive option if that's the path we choose to take. Of course, when we go to any of these compliant paths, having done all the work, in order to determine if you're compliant or not, you don't have to put all your documentation together. And so there are submittals that you do. Now these submittals will go to the local authority or based on your jurisdiction, whatever authority looks at building codes to give them a permit that will now allow them to construct. And based on your local jurisdiction, it is possible in some cases that if a facility or a system does not or is found to be not in compliance with the ASHRAE standards or the CREEBC, then a permit rather, will not be issued. In that case, you have to ensure that you have all the necessary documentation to be able to provide to the code reviewers. Now, we will now go through this compliance path. So we have a number of pictures here to highlight some of the many types of systems that we consider when we think of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. At the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, where I work, we literally have all of these systems. These are not pictures taken from our systems, by the way, but we have examples of all these systems. In fact, we also have systems that utilizes active chill beams. I didn't put a picture here because it's not clearly recognizable from the pictures what it might be, but those are actually even more advanced type of air conditioning systems. We also utilize district cooling using absorption cooling. Why I'm mentioning this is because whilst we have the common type of HVAC systems that are common throughout the region, the CREEBC also refers to the more advanced types as well. And in the CREEBC, we'll be able to get details in terms of if we want to go shopping for such a system, what are the minimum requirements that we should aim to get in that system in order to ensure that when we procure that system and have it installed based on the manufacturer requirements and the standards that govern how the system should be installed, operate, and maintained, we'll be able to ensure that we get the maximum benefits over the life of the system. The CREEBC actually provides us with that. It's a wealth of information, it's a wealth of knowledge embodied in just a book. I mean, it's quite a large manual. It can be a bit intimidating, but it's a fairly easy read. Has close to 400 pages, but it's mainly about tables and tables detailing specifications. So you won't have to read the whole thing. So you're focusing, for example, on a chiller, and that chiller will be installed in a space that of a certain size, whether it's a new building or not, and you already decide that, okay, you're going to use an HVAC compliant path, and you ensure that you fulfill all the mandatory requirements that were specified earlier. So your installation, all these things are intact. And then you go ahead and you look at the specifications now to ensure that the unit that you're purchasing actually meets the ASHRAE requirements. It's pretty straightforward in that regard, and this system allows that, allows you to benefit from that wealth of cumulative knowledge. So the aim of the HVAC compliant pass is really to maintain control of energy use, keep thermal control, within the bounds that you specified, and to shut off the system and the components when not needed. So there are many ways to achieve this. Off our setback optimum start. Optimum start is not as popular in the region, but we tend to have optimum start program where we ensure that the temperature conditions are achieved at the required times. So if persons come to work at 8:30, you probably can have the AC turn on from 7 and with a set point of maybe 27 degrees C, and then gradually go to 24 degrees C. And in that regard, you will be able to achieve higher levels of energy efficiency because you wouldn't have had the system ramping up to full capacity and sustaining that for a much longer period. So from an energy management perspective, that can also be good. There are many other systems, captive key cards that we tend to use in the hospitality industry, and the list goes on. So many opportunities for you to be compliant, and the ASHRAE standards that is entailed in the CREEBC provides you with a blueprint in many respects of how to achieve that. So the mandatory requirements, you have to, do all the calculations, you have to provide all that information, you have to demonstrate there's control and way to diagnose issues and problems and rectify them. You have to ensure that the system construction and installations are code compliant. And if you're dealing with refrigerated display case, there's a path, there's information on that, as well as for walk-in coolers and freezers. So prescriptive path, if you're going to prescriptive path and you want to use other systems such as economizers, simultaneous heating and cooling, etc., then you also be able to achieve that. So it's just a lot of information that's available, and we should all find ways to utilize that in our decision making when we're constructing new commercial facilities, whether we're renovating facilities or if we're just changing out a system within that facility. There's also about a compliance path that deals with service water heating. And so in this case, where service water heating is concerned, we talk about a hot water heater, for example, and not everyone currently utilize a solar water heating system. It may still very well be electric. And electric, not only for persons for human use or for potable water use, but also for example, a swimming pool or other purposes. In that case, the mandatory requirements of the ASHRAE standards tells you that you need to have your load calculations, you need to have equipment efficiency data, you need to have the information on the piping and how it's insulated. We need to know information about the service water heating system and the controls that are available. And by asking these questions, the code actually provides details in terms of what is it you look for, what the level should be, and how you can achieve the compliance that you seek. Here we have a section that deals with the spools, and we have another section that deals with heat traps. What you can see here is a typical heat trap where, hot water in this case would rise and the cold water sinks. So what this heat trap does is ensure that the cold water will remain in the tank. In other words, the moment someone turns on the shower, they're more likely to get warm water out of it because the warm water tends to be at the top. And that will help to save not just on energy, but also on water, because persons will tend to run the tap for long periods until they find the warm water coming out and then they start to shower. But if you have a heat trap system, then you can be more efficient. Of course, there's a prescriptive path for service water heating as well as it goes through. So before I go into the next category that will deal with power and lighting as we come close to the end, I'll pause for a moment and I'll ask my moderator, Ms. Ramachala, can you please check to see if there are any questions for me so far in the chat? And I'll be able to respond before I continue.
Okay, there's one question. What is a building envelope and how is it mandatory?
Okay, thank you for the question. The building envelope itself, it's let's consider it as the walls of the facility that separates everything outside from what is inside. So it's almost like the skin of your body. So your skin serves many purposes. Apart from ensuring that your blood stays in your body and you maintain a certain temperature, a certain pressure within your system. Your skin also helps to cool you down if it's too hot. When you perspire, you sweat, and all of those wonderful things about your skin. Think about the building walls as the envelope. And in certain jurisdictions, and even here in the Caribbean, it's not just block and steel or wood that makes up a wall. You have various coats of painting, and also on the internal side of the wall, you may have various insulation. For example, if you intend to air condition that space, I've seen in many instances where we actually insulate the inner part of the wall. So everything that forms a barrier between the outside environment and the inside, that's the envelope. So what we're saying now is that in the ASHRAE compliance path, we tend to look at a building in terms of systems. And so one of the systems in a building is the building envelope. In addition to that, we have the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning is another system in a building. We also have service water heating. We also have lighting. So what ASHRAE is saying is that we can take a systems approach to compliance. And so to answer your question, the building envelope speaks specifically to what separates the outside of the building, the outside environment from the conditioned space. And when we talk about having a mandatory requirements, it speaks to what are the requirements your building envelope must meet in order for you to be compliant with the ASHRAE standards. And among the things that it talks about is the need for insulation, and the insulation that you have must be of a required standard. The need for you to be mindful of your climatic zone to ensure that the type of insulation you use is appropriate. And insulation can also be painting. You talk about how you can reduce solar heat gain. You talk about how you can eliminate air leakage, that is the conditioned air leaking outside or unconditioned air seeping inside, because that can have an impact on your air conditioning as well as your indoor air quality. So the standard speaks about these things. And when we talk about things being mandatory, we're talking about what are the important aspects of the envelope you need to consider in order to ensure compliance. Thank you for that question. I may have
Thank
another
you,
minute to take one
Stanley.
more before I move on.
There's one more question.
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
I believe we need to clarify. So you'd have spoken about the climatic conditions, and the query is, I know that Montserrat was listed as zone 1. Is that a typo? Because we would have said that the climatic zone would have been zone 0 for the CARICOM region.
Okay, I doubt it very much if it's a typo, because I actually took a scan of the CREEBC, and a lot of how a zone is determined is based on the cooling degree days. And the cooling degree days will be determined based on weather data that's provided. And usually, in the case of Montserrat, I'm sharing that screen now, they tend to look at the John A. Osborne Airport, the data that was provided there. Now, some data was missing, but in terms of the information that was provided based on the elevation and the precipitation levels, that was determined for Montserrat. And zone 1A would have, based on the ASHRAE standard 169/2013, it would have provided you with detail in terms of exactly what zone 1A means. So once you're A, it refers to the fact that you tends to be more of a moist, so I'm highlighting A for moist, and the legend will indicate whether it's moist, whether it's dry. So it's tropical, but in the case of Montserrat, it's probably very hot, but not as tropical, because tropical under the 169 standard would be extremely hot. Now, I mean, think about it. Someone coming to the Caribbean to have an airy time, as we say in Jamaica, and talking about going somewhere that is extremely hot and humid. That doesn't sound too hospitable. So we decided to use a notation that's tropical. And when you hear tropical, it automatically sounds more inviting. Montserrat is not extremely hot. Montserrat is very hot. So the notation for Montserrat would have been a bit different from the other areas. So I don't think there was a typo. I think the information is correct. But we can always look at this just to be sure. So thank you for that question. I hope I responded, but I must now move on. We'll have another opportunity to ask questions. Thank you, Ms. Ramachala. I'll now move on and continue with the presentation. Okay, so the next compliant path that we're looking at under the ASHRAE 90.1 2016. And by the way, the other compliance path, if you have the ASHRAE document itself, they're in certain sections. So the envelope would have been section 5, then the HVAC would have been section 6. The water heating would have been section 7, and power, which we're now talking about, will be section 8. So if you get a copy of your code, of your ASHRAE standards, and you are interested in talking about power, and you want to ensure that the power that is supplied to the building. Now remember, we're taking a systems approach. And so the power that is supplied to the building, we want to ensure that that power meets ASHRAE standards. Now, just think about it for a second. How would we actually approach that? Power coming in we utilize the power, but what about it can we ensure to meet ASHRAE standards? Well, these guys think about everything. And what you have here in that short video, it's our net zero energy building. And I said or because it belongs to the Caribbean. It's a fabulous facility. It was constructed at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, and it is supposed to be our first net zero energy building in the region. I said supposed to because you normally get you normally demonstrate that you achieve net zero energy after a year operation, and you're able to demonstrate that more of your energy was generated from low or zero carbon energy sources as opposed to what you consumed. So you'll be net zero, so to speak. You didn't contribute any CO2 emission because you didn't use any fossil for the year. This facility actually utilizes many systems that would make this building compliant with ASHRAE in all the different areas that we have been talking about so far. I'll invite you one day you come to Jamaica to request a tour of this facility, as well as there's a website that would provide some information on it as well. But just to go on though, the scope of power, it applies to all buildings, power distribution systems, and only to equipment described below. And when I say equipment described below, I'm going to go through it in a bit, but for new buildings, for additions and alterations, it only relates to those. So for this net zero energy building, I'll be giving some specific examples. So you want to ensure that in order to meet the ASHRAE 90.1 compliance for power, you want to ensure that the voltage drop in the different feeders that supplies power to this building, there's a maximum of 5% voltage drop. Now, that demonstrates that you need to ensure that all your conductors, everything are sized appropriately, the type of wires that are utilized, the different loads that you put per circuit, and the type of circuits, they are in conformance with established international best practices as well as your local electrical code. So everything has to be in conformance from an electrical standpoint. But here's where it gets interesting. You must have automatic receptacle control. So what that means is that some of your outlets, your sockets, you must be able to schedule them to turn on and off at set interval, or if you want to manually do that. And while you're doing that, you want to ensure that you can monitor the consumption from that outlet. So let's say, for example, you have a computer room and you may have, say, 20 computers in that room, and you're utilizing you may have 20 outlets. You probably can have 10 of those outlets that will be on a receptacle that can be controlled, and you can program that receptacle to turn on and off. But then you might stop and think, well, it's probably not the most appropriate place for a computer lab because you want to shut down computers properly. You don't want them to just turn off without properly shut down because damage can occur. So instead of that, you may put a system that you're better able to shut down if it's not being used or if after hours. So for example, you may have task lighting, you may have large copier or other types of machines that they don't require a certain order to shut down. And you are able to now use a special receptacle because you're meeting this power requirement. As we have in the net zero building, what you're seeing here is actually a Benjamin smart panel board. So if you Google Benjamin smart panel board, you will see information on that. And we have that installed. So you label this and you say, okay, this is for the computer lab, this is for the pumps, this is for task lights. And you can schedule what time they come on and off. And you can also monitor how energy is utilized through these receptacles over the life of the system. You can also connect specifically your circuit breakers. It doesn't have to be a 110 or 220 volts outlet. It can be an actual circuit breaker that you monitor. And that circuit breaker can be serving your exterior lights, or it can be serving your interior lights for your computer lab, or your interior lights for your corridor. Whatever it is, what the ASHRAE standard is saying is that you must be able to control a certain percentage of your receptacles in your facility, and you must be able to monitor it. Now that is huge, because once you have information in terms of how energy is being utilized, what's being consumed, you have the ability to now manage. You have the ability to control what happens. There'll be almost no surprises, and you can intervene. You can see if someone left the lights on all night, the night before, if the pump developed a problem and it's running for much longer hours than it should, or because you have this type of monitoring. So all of this is mandatory. under the ASHRAE standards. And of course, there are submitters. Submitters meaning the type of information that you must supply to the code, to the local authority in order to get the permit to go ahead and implement your system. So part of what ASHRAE is saying is that it's not that you just go ahead and do something and saying that you have met the requirements, but it's that you do it properly, that it is well documented, and that the local authorities have a record of this being done. And so it requires forward planning, and it requires due diligence in your implementation. The next point we're going to is lighting, which is extremely popular. Now, lighting, we all need light, because without light, we can't see. And it impacts our productivity, it impacts our feeling of well-being. Based on the lighting quality that you have, you can see totally different outcomes in terms of learning, in terms of people's mood, in terms of productivity. And many studies have been done regarding these. In fact, we've actually done studies on this at the university as well, and we have lots of data to show how important lighting is. Lighting typically accounts for maybe 26 to 29% of our overall energy use in commercial spaces. And nowadays, we have so many options for lighting because LEDs are becoming far more ubiquitous, as well as it's more affordable, as well as the quality of LED lighting in terms of how it impacts your eyes. It's far better than it was in the past. So lighting is a big part of the ASHRAE standards. And I won't go through it in all the detail because we already have a lot of familiarity about lighting. So I've chosen a chart to summarize it, in that when you talk about lighting, the mandatory requirements, both for interior and exterior, you must have controls. And controls can be as simple as having a switch, to intermediate as having occupancy sensors, turning off after 15 minutes of inactivity. It can be even more sophisticated as being using daylight sensors. So it's not that no one is in the space, it's that outside is so bright that you don't need to have the lights inside as bright. So you have special sensors monitoring what's going on and adjusting the lighting levels accordingly. Now, all of this is done in conformance with another set of standards that deals with lighting. And you have an entire society, you know, the Illumination Society, that they deal with lighting, and that's all they do. And they can tell you the amount of lighting that you need for different tasks in terms of ensuring that you meet international best practices in terms of, you know, occupational health and safety. So you can design for lighting, and the code actually tells you how you can do your various engineering calculations to ensure that your lighting levels are in conformance with the various standards. Even though you don't have a copy of those standards, sufficient information is in the code to ensure that you design your lighting in conformance of those standards. And in addition to that, sufficient information is there for you to be able to select the best luminaire, the best type of lighting to meet your needs. So controls can be basic, they can be sophisticated, but you need control. It goes further to talk about when you talk about switching. If you're going to control the lighting and you have a large auditorium, you're not going to have one switch turning off 20, 30, 50 luminaires one time. You probably can have multiple switches, because it is possible that you can now you're not using the entire space one time, so you don't want all the lighting to be on. Or you may not need all that lighting power. So you talk about lighting power density and how you use information on lighting power density to ensure that you're in conformance. The standard has a lot of tables with details about lighting power density for facilities of various types. And when we go into facilities of various types, you can approach it from under the interior light limits. You can approach it in terms of the building area or space by space. So some organizations, persons, you have cubicles, there's a large auditorium, you have cubicles. Other places you may have individual offices, and you have so many different configurations. The standards, the CREEBC considers all of that, and it has a lot of tables providing the information that you will need to ensure that your lighting design, when finished, will be in conformance with the standards, as long as you implement the various requirements that are placed. So mandatory controls, switching, and overall efficiency of the luminaires. And efficiency keeps going up. So each time you have a code review, you may have new standards being developed to say, okay, let's raise the bar a bit. We talk about interior lighting and power limits. And of course, there are exceptions and there are allowances. but we also look at exterior lighting and power limits. And we talk about being tradable. Now, that's a very useful thing to be able to do, because you may be looking at a parking lot and you might be able to say, okay, you know, some places in the Caribbean are not as safe as you want it to be, especially after 10 o'clock at night, and persons are concerned about their safety. And so instead of meeting the requirements at ASHRAE in terms of your lighting power density and amount of lumens falling on a certain square foot, and on a certain square meter of space, you probably double that, because persons want it to be much brighter so they can stay much further away and view that parking area before they arrive. And that gives them a better sense of safety. In that case, you may go over budget, but then you can actually trade with something else. You can say, okay, I went over in terms of my parking area, but probably I can do better than the code requires in my office spaces, in my bathroom, in my storage facilities. And just by doing that, you do better in one area, not as good in the other, but at the end of the day, you're still compliant because you traded. There are exceptions, and there are also areas that are non-tradable, but at the end of the day, lighting, it's dealt with in detail in the code, and all information required is there. We have a lot of zones for exterior lighting in terms of whether it be a developed area, parks, forests, zone 1, whether it's a residential area or a mixed neighborhood, zone 2, all other areas, and then you have other areas that are high activity. Now, based on different lighting zones, you also have details in the code to tell you how you fashion your lighting to meet those requirements. As we come to the end of the compliance path and we come close to wrapping up on our presentation, and then we'll be able to have a discussion about how some of these ideas can be applied, we decide to end by saying that there's another section that deals with other. So we talk about the traditional building systems, the envelope. Don't forget the HVAC. Please remember, that's a big one. All right, HVAC, 46% energy utilization in some buildings, as high as 60%. I've seen this doing energy audits over the years. In fact, I've seen 65% of the energy usage of a facility just for HVAC. So you can take an ASHRAE compliance path in the CREEBC, and you can get that 60% to be more efficient. Hence, you end up saving dollars, reducing your CO2 impact, and the many other benefits that comes from that. We talk about service water heating, we talk about power, we talk about lighting. Now, there may be other things that are not included. For example, large electric motors. At UA, we have our absorption cooling system. And even though the absorption cooling system is a system on its own and it would fall under HVAC, we use pumps at different points to serve different purposes. And these are huge pumps. All right, we have 6-story facilities that will send all that chilled water, you know, throughout that facility. Pumps, the motors that drive those pumps, they fall in a category on their own because there's just so much details about them and different approaches that you can take to make them more efficient. And so the code contemplated that, and they provide a path for you to be able to deal with that. You talk about potable water pressure booster systems, elevators, escalators, and the whole building energy monitoring, which is very important. Being able to monitor your building in its entirety, knowing how energy is being utilized, being able to identify opportunities for energy savings, eliminate energy waste. Those are low-hanging fruits that you can easily capitalize on, and hence making your building even more efficient. The ASHRAE compliance part in the CREEBC allows you to be able to go through that. So there's a whole lot of information, all right? But on the other, everything just applies to specific equipment. It's not a broad brush thing, so you won't have any information on prescriptive compliance paths or alternative. And so that is what we talk about when we refer to the ASHRAE compliant path. But then on the ASHRAE, as I showed earlier, you saw where it came down to the ASHRAE 90.1 2016, and then we had we had information in terms of the prescriptive requirements. But we also have a second path, and I'll just speak about this briefly. And this second path speaks about the energy cost budget. Now, this is an alternative to the prescriptive provisions. So you have everything will be mandatory, and then you can go prescriptive. So you do everything exactly as they say, and you're compliant. But if you miss anything, it's either 100% or nothing at all. That's how ASHRAE is. But if for some reason you can't meet 100%, but you're close, or maybe even 75%, then you can look at the energy cost budget method. So that's a second pathway to be compliant. And this may be employed for evaluating compliance of all proposed designs, except for designs with no mechanical systems. With the energy cost budget method, computer program is used. And in this case, you actually simulate how the building would operate using what you have versus if you had done everything that ASHRAE said. And when you do the comparison, then based on the results from that, you determine whether you're compliant or not. So this is very useful because this can save on overall costs to the user and also makes it more likely that persons will have some level of compliance, because it's not always possible to implement everything based on the cost, the time, skill set, even availability of the technology that's required. But there's another way, the energy cost budget. Finally, we also have a third compliance path, which is fairly new since the 2016 version was published. And this is mainly used if you're using, after you have constructed your building, you want to compare yourself with a lead to see if you have met, requirements, and you're not able to compare your building, your commercial facility with another commercial facility to see how well you're doing. This method under Appendix G allows you to do that because it uses a metric that's referred to as the performance cost index. And what the performance cost index does is that it look at the proposed building performance, and then it divides that, and then it takes a ratio of that with the baseline building performance. So it's a ratio of the proposed building performance to the baseline building performance. And once you have the proposed building performance being less than or equal, well, less than really, once you have the baseline building performance, the proposed building performance being less than the baseline, then you'll be able to achieve some level of compliance. And you see here where the performance cost index, it shows you where they are now in 2016, somewhere in the region of 65% overall, and they're heading to the future, which will be net zero. So they have started at 100 and they have now all the way down to 65. So they are making progress. And overall, these energy codes that we've been using, they make sense. They have been extremely effective at helping to reduce overall energy waste in buildings. And we consider them to be a saving grace in many aspects because they give us a blueprint in terms of how we can achieve our regional energy goals, especially as relates to our Caribbean regional energy policy. So building energy use must be addressed. They must be addressed. And we're all here because we believe in that. And we have a vested interest in ensuring that happens. In my presentation, I sought to explain to you how the CREEBC and the ASHRAE provisions in the CREEBC can actually assist you in achieving those objectives. Human behavior, on the other hand, is a very important aspect. And so in order to ensure that the code itself is utilized, we have to build awareness. And so we're very grateful to COSQ for having these types of webinars, and also especially grateful to you for taking the time to participate in these webinars, because that builds awareness, it builds knowledge as well, and it will promote adoption. And once you're able to do that, then more people start using it. And we don't have to actually get to the point, particularly where the government now has to make it law and begin to penalize people in order to do it. We can also do it willingly, but of course, government doing it also helps. So I want to thank you very much for allowing me to share aspects of the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 compliant path with you. As I end this presentation, I'll hand over to my moderator, Ms. Ramachala. There are 2 discussion questions I have, and she would indicate if there's any time, and then we will proceed from there. Thank you very much. Ms. Ramachala?
Thank you, Stanley, for going through the very technical requirements and breaking it down in a way that we can generally understand. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. So I will read the first one. So the NEC requirements for voltage drop in feeders should be at plus or minus 2% for PV installations. So the question is, why is 5% stipulated for normal supply? Okay. So why is the difference between the 2% versus the 5% in the code requirement?
Okay, well, I'll respond to it like this. The codes, when the codes are developed, it's not a, for example, from an electrical code standpoint, they're more stringent in terms of that 2%, and in terms of safety need for that, and there are many other reasons for how they arrived at that. However, when you talk about an international code, it involves many parties, not just us for example, I'm in Jamaica, not just you, not sure where scholars from this question came from, but Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, wherever. It could also be from anywhere in the United States. Now, there are various requirements that those technical bodies may have. And in those jurisdictions, it may very well have been 5%. The thing about the code development process is that it's a consultative process. And whatever is put in the code and agreed on and published, it is arrived at based on consensus. And so I suspect that 5% actually arrived based on that consultative process. And after exhausting it over a number of years, and based on what is possible, the consensus was, okay, let's make it 5% because you don't want to make code breakers out of everybody. You want to consider the various limitations and try to see how you can nudge everyone in the direction that you want. So it may very well get to 2% one day. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. So the questions are coming in via the Q&As. So please continue typing your questions. So we have another question. Building maintenance is not normally as good as it needs to be in the Caribbean. How can we deal with this to ensure compliant buildings continue to be energy efficient?
How we deal with the issue of making buildings continue to be energy efficient? Was that what you said?
Yes, and the comment is building maintenance is not as good as it should be in the Caribbean. So given that gap we have with the building maintenance and facilities management, how do we ensure that buildings continue to be compliant with the energy codes?
Okay, well, wonderful question. The energy code not only speaks about design and not only speaks about construction, but it also speaks about operation and maintenance. And so in the energy code itself, you will find some tips in terms of what you can implement within your organization to ensure that whatever measures you put in today, you're able to sustain them and get the maximum benefits over the life of it. One method is to have monitoring, energy monitoring in place, because the moment a system fails or begins to fail by virtue of not being sufficiently maintained, or maybe a user or an occupant of the building changed the settings, by continuous monitoring, you'll be able to detect that from early. And so that is one sure way of ensuring that you continue to get the benefits. But I must also say that continued awareness, like energy awareness programs within your organizations, energy coordinators, having persons who, as part of their responsibility, and it could be voluntary, it doesn't have to be something that's paid, but as part of their voluntary, they volunteer into their workplace environment, there'll be an energy monitor, looking out for stuff, ensuring that you have signage in places, encouraging persons to turn off the light if they're the last one out. That's if you don't have occupancy sensors, informing persons about how best to dress in the workplace in terms of being appropriately dressed, not too warm and then you max out the AC, stuff like that. So I believe your question has more to do with having implemented the system, how you ensure that after next month, next year, next 5 years, you continue to get benefits. And I'm just putting to you that an energy coordinators or energy awareness program will go a far way, as well as having energy monitoring in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. So we have another question. If a country provides unstable electricity, how will these codes help? And what challenges will we pose if the electricity supply continues to be unreliable? Do we really realize the savings we intend to?
Okay, well, thanks for that question. I must say, however, that this presentation is really about ASHRAE 90.1 2016. However, you'll be surprised to know that that question was actually addressed largely in ASHRAE 90.1 2019, because increasingly, persons are integrating distributed energy resources into their local systems. And that in and of itself can create intermittencies. It can make your system a bit more unreliable, so to speak, especially if you don't have proper energy storage. And so those aspects were considered. They've always been considered, but as I mentioned, the code development process is consultative, and you can't put in everything one time because make persons creating a lot more code breakers because persons may not be able to adapt or adopt the requirements quick enough. And so in ASHRAE 90.1 2019, it speaks more to how issues as what you have just described can be addressed. But in a nutshell, how we're doing it increasingly nowadays is to have systems that allow us to some way forecast your energy usage. And so having done sufficient energy monitoring, a profile will become apparent. It will appear what your usage profile is like. And based on that, you'll be able to predict with a fair level of certainty, all things being equal, how your facility uses energy on a Monday versus a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And you can now implement programs to ensure that you are better able to manage that energy usage. So sometimes when you have power reliability problems, it's because the demand is too great and your renewable or your distributed energy supply can't provide that. And so you have voltage sags occurring, frequencies, power frequencies start to drift, and lights flicker and equipment can get damaged. All these things can happen. But if you do simple stuff in terms of shifting your usage to another time of the day, maybe employing power factor correction, perhaps maybe even putting in battery energy storage. These are various options that the 2019 version of the code will consider. I must say, however, that for our CREEBC, we're focusing on 2016, but you're free to get a copy of the 2019, have a look at it, and see how those can help to address some of your concerns. Thank you. Edita?
Thank you, Stanley, for that comprehensive response. So there's another question here. What is the path to get ASHRAE certified? Because you would have mentioned the various options in the presentation earlier. So if you could give some more details.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can speak to that, but should we be speaking about ASHRAE certified or should we be speaking about CREEBC certified? Which one? Let's focus on getting CREEBC certified, which of course it includes being compliant with the ASHRAE provisions, but being CREEBC certified, that's our aim, because not everything in ASHRAE is for us in the Caribbean. And trying to get certification from ASHRAE, some things that we may talk about and some of our practices or behaviors or, or trade-offs, so to speak, it may not be as appreciated as much. And so it will be better to try to get CREEBC certified. I'm not sure if that's a thing though. I guess CrossQ can speak to that, but that's certainly what I would recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. And, just to make the point that we would have developed as a region, something that is specific to our needs, even the changes to the climatic zones is something that we need to take on board. So the intent of CrossQ is to do that training and sensitization so that we can comply with the requirements of our regional code. So there's another question. And how can the indicators in the climate zone table help in energy management planning?
How can we have an energy management plan for Caribbean sustainable energy management plan?
So the question is, based on the indicators in the climatic zone that you would have shared with us, how can using that table help in our energy management planning for our region or our countries?
Okay, that's not an easy question to answer in a forum like this. It's a lot of things to consider, but I'll give you one example, and I hope this will provide some amount of response. Let's say, for example, that you're going ahead to implement an HVAC system for your new office facility that you're constructing. The mechanical engineer will come along and they take the size of the space and they know the volume of the space. And they might just contact a local person who sells AC, and they might just tell you what they have in their product catalog because they're just in the business of selling air conditioning systems. And the mechanical engineer might just be in the business of sizing it because engineers design, salesperson sell. But what the ASHRAE standard is doing now is making you that much wiser. And when you now consider that, okay, the ASHRAE speaks about a climatic zone and it has all this information. Okay, let me look at the information it has for me. And then same time, it shows you that you're in this particular climatic zone. And then it tells you what your cooling degree days are like. Now, being armed with information about your cooling degree days, you can now go ahead and you can calculate with great degree of accuracy how much energy really your facility should be requiring to maintain a certain level of comfort in a year. And based on that now, you can utilize information on that particular air conditioning unit that was being proposed to you, and you can see if that system will allow you to achieve that. Now, once you start asking these questions, now the mechanical engineer might look at it and say, this person know what's going on, you know? So they might have a different approach in terms of what they recommend to you, the type of details they provide, because you're no longer gullible. You're more aware, you're wise, you know what is going on. And so the climatic data that is provided in ASHRAE literally allows you to achieve that. Another thing that it does is that it allows you to ensure that you're not just putting up block on steel and showing an AC unit in there, and then you just chill the place and everybody just get, freeze. It's not about that. It's how can you properly insulate that space to ensure that you're using at a bare minimum in terms of your mechanical, your AC system to cool that space. And so you might start asking questions of your mechanical engineer. Okay, so the facility is there, but how about adding some insulation to the roof? What kind of insulation can we use? What would the ceiling cavity be like? How much space between it? About the roof, about the flooring. Did you do anything about the flooring? About our walls, about our windows? And once you start asking those questions, it's all based on the fact that you have knowledge about your climatic zone, and you have knowledge about the fact that ASHRAE is saying to you that in this particular zone, these are your cooling degree days. And so if you're over that, find ways to get it down. And you may not only be able to achieve it by buying a more expensive AC unit, if you choose that compliance path, but you can achieve it by improving your billing envelope. And so just by having that information on your climate data, you're able to literally make a more informed decision in terms of how to condition the space that you're now creating. And when you condition that space, you're doing it as efficiently as possible, because you're not just focusing on a mechanical aspect. You're focusing on insulation, you're focusing on air leakage. And these are very important aspects of the ASHRAE compliance. I hope I touched on some stuff, but it's a lot more than that, but I try to condense it.
Thank you, Stanley. So I'm just going to take two more questions. And referring to the net zero building on the NOMA campus, is the building itself set up according to the CREEBC?
Okay, well, the University of the West Indies is an institution of CARICOM. The Net Zero Energy Building, it was financed through a grant at GEF, Global Environmental Fund, as well as, I think we got some assistance through the EU as well, and certainly from the CARICOM Secretariat. And so it belongs to all of us. And so while it's not a part of the CREEBC per se, but when it was construction completed in 2017, the CREEBC came out, well, the development of the CREEBC was completed in 2018, and it was formally published and promulgated in 2019. And so the ideas that are entailed in the Net Zero Energy Building, I sat on the committee, I contributed to this development, and there are other persons who also contributed in, and they have respective knowledge and expertise in different areas. And so that Net Zero Energy Building represents the cumulative experience from the region. And so while it wasn't built based on the CREEBC, because it happened before the time, the information that is in the CREEBC, if you take this CREEBC right now and go to that Net Zero Energy Building, you can begin to tick off on a checklist how it has actually met these same requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. So there's a more technical question in the chat, but I will go over it. Are the R values available for the building materials used in the Caribbean? And if not, are there any initiatives to test or obtain the R values?
Okay, so this was a big point during the development of the CREEBC. And the materials that we use and what is readily afforded, available to us based on cost, and cost in terms of acquiring it as well as moving it around, working with it, it does limit what we have access to, especially when we talk about insulation and for infrastructural strength and all of that. And this was considered in so many ways. And that is why in the CREEBC, you tend to just provide values in terms of the R values based on, talking about your mass walls and stuff, and furniture for windows and doors and all of that. So it's values it provides, and it does give some indication of materials as well, But the fact that it provides values, then you can find a way to measure that material that you intend to use. Or if the information is available that actually has data on the level of resistance that these material provides to the flow of heat from outside to inside, then that information is also used. So for example, the use of bamboo might become more popular in the Caribbean in the near future. Bamboo is not widely used in construction, but it is something that can certainly be used, and there are talks about using it. I've actually, and it was a little surprising in a sense that it took me going to a conference in the UK to actually see examples of bamboo being widely used. And here in the Caribbean, I mean, we have so much bamboo, So it's something to come, and it shows that a lot of the material that we have and we have not been using, if we have information on the R values and the U values for those materials, then we can now begin to consider using those materials in our construction in terms of providing the insulation that's required for compliance with the CREEBC. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. So I will take the last final question and then we will close the Q&A session. But the question that came in the Caribbean, most of the buildings are constructed with 8-inch thick concrete blocks, which are plastered on both sides, then painted or textured and finished. How can this be insulated?
Okay, well, you notice something that you just said though. Even though you have the 8-inch blocks, and even though you fill it on the inside and you plaster on both sides, it's still essentially cement, sand, and gravel that you're using. And in terms of how heat can pass through that material, whether through radiation, that particular wall of that building might be facing the sun, and as that wall heats up, the heat is transmitted through the wall from exterior to the interior. And because it is entirely made of pretty much concrete, that conductance, that how the heat radiates in the space, can be significant. And as the interior wall heats up and the air inside the space touches the wall, then you have heat transfer by convection, and all of this starts happening, and just because of the material. One of the things that we did for our net zero energy building, because we made a concerted effort to use locally sourced material, is that for the wall that faced the east, that would have had more sunlight throughout the day, after constructing it with our block and steel, instead of plastering it alone with the cement, we now covered it with a sheet of wood. And the wood that we used would have been interlocking. And after that was completed, we painted it with a special paint that had insulating characteristics. And would you believe, just by doing that, we dramatically reduced the amount of heat that was transferred through that wall into the conditioned space. So yes, we can continue to use our 8-inch blocks and our construction methods, because we are in fact in earthquake zones, and earthquakes don't happen as frequently, but they're deadly. But we do have more frequent hurricanes, and we have seen in recent times that they're not as frequent, but they are, these are powerful storms, and they can do tremendous damage to our infrastructure. And so we have a vested interest to continue to build with block and steel to ensure structural integrity. But we can also now bolster that by ensuring that we have adequate insulation by using other types of material to achieve that. So that's the direction that the standard wants you to go at, because you'll be forced to consider the building envelope, and you'll be able to think that, okay, I've measured my overall resistance to heat flow for this particular wall, and realize that we're not in compliance. How can we now add additional layers of insulation to ensure that we're compliant? And just by asking those questions, you find that there are many options available. And I just mentioned too, there are paints available that can readily allow you to achieve it, as well as you can now use another material that covers the walls or the concrete. Of course, you can also construct your building in terms of the orientation to try not to have the larger walls facing the sun. You can use also vegetation to create a shading to improve on your building envelope. There are so many options, but being aware that these are important things to achieve compliance and to achieve levels of energy efficiency, as stated in the CREEBC, then you can now go ahead and begin to implement because you're now more aware, you're now more knowledgeable, and you're now better armed with information on how to achieve it. And that's really what we try to achieve with the CREEBC. So I really urge you to get your copy and to encourage your local authorities to make this mandatory, to comply, to cause others to comply with its use. And if you're in charge of a facility, whether it's renovation, new construction, or just changing some equipment, have a look at this standard to see how best you can make the better and wiser choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley, for sharing the wealth of knowledge on the use and the different pathways for the CREEBC based on the ASHRAE 90.1. We got a lot of feedback saying thank you for the great presentation. So I'd like to bring the Q&A to a close. Sorry, Norbert, but we will take your question offline. And I will now turn you over to Ms. Latoya Burnham, the Technical Officer at CREEBC for Quality Promotions, to close the session today. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you as well, Nadita, and good morning to everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I know some of you are jumping off now, but I want to say to the panels, the presenters that we've had over the last 3 days, starting with Mr. Norbert on Tuesday. We had Mr. Ryan Cobb of Belize on Wednesday, and today Mr. Stanley Smelly of Jamaica. We've had 3 days of very, very interesting presentations, and I think the information has been tremendously beneficial to the audience. We note your comments, we note your questions, and we thank you for the engagement as well amongst each other. I also want to say thank you to the moderators, Mr. Fulgence Saint-Prix, Mr. John of CREEBC, Mr. Jonathan Platt of the Barbados National Standards Institution, and Ms. Nadita Ramachala of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. You've all done excellent jobs over the last 3 days to guide the discussion and to help the flow of questions, as well as recapping what would have been said on the previous days. Now, we note the comments in relation to more awareness being necessary, more sessions of training being necessary, but we also want to encourage member states to also take up the charge nationally to see how you can get your engineers and your building sectors also trained and certified to the CREEBC or CREEBC, as the new term has been coined over the last couple of days. The code itself can help our region in terms of energy efficiency. And as we would have indicated at the very start, our mandate has been to bring quality really to the energy sector in the region to help with the very high and rising cost of energy and energy production in our region. So I really want to say thank you as well to the team behind the scenes, our project coordinator, Ms. Janice Hilaire, and Ms. Jill Brown, our project assistant, and Ms. Diaka Straker, who's our project intern, who has been working, the team has been working really hard behind the scenes to make sure that these 3 days were successful and that you were able as the audience to benefit from the sessions. So I really want to say thank you to the team behind the scenes, and of course to CREEBC, who has partnered with us and continue to partner with us as we unfold these awareness sessions in relation to the code, and help us in relation to bringing their expertise as well to the floor when we start discussions on energy and the building code as well. Thank you to the TAPSET project, the European Union, the German Corporation, as well as GIZ, who are behind the scenes funding or engagements or awareness or trainings. It could not have been possible what we've been able to do across the region in terms of starting the trainings with some of our professionals without projects like the TAPSET project, as well as the Environment for Sustainable Development project, the ESD project by 5Cs that would have started the training even ahead of the TAPSEC. We are, of course, always looking for avenues to continue training you, our professionals, and to continue bringing awareness sessions to you, the public. And we thank you for your reception. We thank you for your questions. It helps us to gauge exactly what your knowledge is, what your needs are in relation to the awareness, in relation to the sensitization, as well as in relation to the education. And this pretty much brings us to a close today. We've kept the sessions tight for the most part, and we appreciate your interest. We appreciate you signing on, and we invite you to also keep tuned to our YouTube page. You can Google the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality and visit our YouTube. There have been questions that would have been posed over the last 3 days that we did not get to answer live because of time constraints. We'll be posting the questions and responses on our YouTube videos, as well as on our website, energy.crossq.org. In our research page, we'll have a frequently asked questions tab there that you'll be able to go on and see the responses to some of the questions that you would have seen that we would not have been able to answer. So I want to thank you all, and I want to wish you all a continued safe and an enjoyable day. And I will turn over to the crew in the back to lead us out. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
The CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code was developed to help property developers increase the energy efficiency and the upgradability of their building projects. Energy savings help offset the potential higher cost of building your home to code. And enhanced upgradability helps commercial owners increase their competitive advantage, saving money over time. Additionally, lower energy demands during and after the building process can also lead to community and national level benefits like reduced reliance on fossil fuel generated electricity across the construction industry and in homes, lower national fuel import bills, which can free up funding for other critical areas of investment, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So do the maths, play the long game, and help build towards a better future today. For more information on the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, visit energy.crosq.org.